and let's get this show on the road. Welcome everybody to our BCLI issue series. It's our second one. We only have two this year, and so we're really glad everyone could make it for the Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute. And tonight we got a great, exciting program planned, and hopefully sometime we have some great discussion and questions towards the end. And so, first of all, formally welcome, folks. My name is Terry Tao. I'm the program director of the Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute. As usual, I'm joined tonight with my program manager, Chai Lee, who is, yeah, wave Chai because he's letting folks into the room. And also Chai has also agreed to generously offer his cell phone number in case folks are having technical support, because we know in Zoom times, sometimes it can be hard to get a hold of people. And if your internet goes down, what's the point of us giving you an email? So we actually have a real phone number here of a real live person who will take your call if you do have technical difficulties. So yes, so folks could, yes. So yeah, we are so super happy to have folks join us here tonight. Yep, join us here tonight, um, and kind of going to go over a couple of high level things, right? Which first of all, the boards and commissions, BCLI issue series is part of our broader Boards Missions Leadership Institute. We're a 6-month program that identifies, trains, and helps place BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color leaders on public boards and commissions in support of a racial equity agenda and outcomes. So we are, by nature of our work, we have these events where, and this year we have 16 fellows, many of whom you will see here tonight, who are sort of expected to come, but who are also doing learning about a number of different subjects this year. And so these issue series themselves are cross-sector events designed to build shared knowledge on broader equity issues. And really tonight we want to really build community, right, and do some learning collectively together. We also want to say, as we get started here, as we do at many of our past events, we want to do a full land acknowledgement to talk about, acknowledge and honor that we're on the lands of the Indigenous people, the Dakota and Anishinaabe, and also want to, yeah, acknowledge the lands that we're currently residing in. In addition to that, we wanted to make sure folks are aware that we have some other social media stuff here. You'll see our Twitter handle. So folks are encouraged or inspired by tonight's event. Please feel free to share your thoughts and add us. The other piece is we have, as I mentioned, we are recording today's event. So want folks to be aware of that. And if folks do not want to be recorded, we will be posting this on our website. Please just turn your video off. So a couple things as we begin tonight, right? So we have kind of group agreements. This is something we typically do before each session. We want to commit to learning together. We want to take space and make space, and also have be a brave space. The things we're talking about, racially equitable outcomes, some of the things we're talking about are not, comfortable. They are a little uncomfortable. So we welcome you and invite you in the space to enter into that. We also know collectively, we all, I know things individually, but collectively, we all have wisdom we can share together, and that it's okay to disagree. So we will have because we'll have some interesting conversations tonight, that's for sure. And we'll talk a little bit about how that structure will be held if folks aren't familiar with our Q&A sessions. So that's kind of our group agreements. Our virtual agreement is to mute yourself, since we'll have an amazing panel of presenters. Please utilize the chat as much as possible. We are, while I said, we understand if folks do not want to be recorded, we would love to see people on video, and that will be coming up shortly, but we get the folks need to host themselves and take care of themselves too. And so again, here's a reminder of the tech issue phone number in case folks are having technical issues. So yeah, as we get there underway, I think we're good to go. I'm going to turn it over to Chai, who's going to lead us in, as we do tonight. We talk about building community. We're going to do a great, interesting icebreaker. So Chai.
All right, folks, welcome to our issue series. Because we're all online and virtual, and we want to do something fun and more engaging and physical, and not just be our verbal selves here on the Zoom. Our icebreaker is we're going to ask folks to mime or act out a few things, and there's going to be 3 prompts. And so this is a perfect time to shine through your cameras if you're comfortable, and to get ready to mime or act out the 3 prompts that we're gonna give you. And the first prompt here is to first show us your favorite stretch. So everyone get comfortable and stretch out your arms, bodies. I'm sorry, what was that?
We have to like get up and do it? Yeah.
Yeah, you can get up.
Oh.
Go ahead and stretch and get comfortable.
What if you don't have a favorite stretch?
Yeah, just do whatever you feels comfortable for you to sit well in your seat.
Do all my favorite stretches, right?
The next prompt is show us how you're feeling tonight. Ooh, someone has a rose. Awesome. All right, now get ready for the last prompt. The last prompt is finally mime or represent your favorite spring activity.
Mine would be horseback riding, but I don't have a horse handy, so I'm just gonna.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thanks for taking a minute to get comfortable in your bodies, and so you could get ready to interact with us for the next hour and a half. All right. I hand it back to Terry.
All right. Thank you, Chai. Yeah, hopefully they got, your juice is flowing a little, and I did this the other day, and I thought kind of the acting it out, miming stuff was kind of fun. I saw folks have some really interesting. Some people wanted to garden, right? Looks like that was their favorite spring activity. So yeah, which is great. And I think this is also like we're on camera for a reason. So great. So tonight's context, right? So I wanted to give folks a little bit of kind of background. How did we get here to this issue that we're featuring today, right? The practice of co-governing. So next slide. So what we know is that, I think if anything, the last 4 years demonstrated to us how kind of fragile our democracy is. We know it's imperfect. We know that there are, lots of problems. We know, white supremacy, patriarchy, all sorts of the isms too that are impacting our society. But what we know about our democracy is that we've had to fight for what we want, right? And if anything, the results of the recent elections showed how fractured we are, but at the same time demonstrated what we could do if we were to build collective power, and also what are ways in which we build collective power. And what we know about democracy is that we need to practice it at different levels, right? We need to do every day at the local level, the county level, the regional level, and at the state level. So there's this real practical question of how do we cooperate, right? How do we work together? A colleague of mine at Nexus says we can't cooperate if we can't cooperate. And it sounds silly, but it is absolutely true in terms of particularly in a democracy, right? The BCLI fellows and the alumni here in this call will chuckle because we often talk about doing Robert's Rules training, but that's because it's about one voice, one vote. And because that is also emblematic of when we think about voting, and also how one of the most pivotal ways we engage in our democracy as well too. And so this issue around co-governing tonight, practicing it, really builds upon how we participate, right? Last fall, some folks were here and they joined us, and we talked about the issue of redistricting, right? Which is the ability to draw lines to determine power around, one, who will represent us, and two, the allocation of resources for the next 10 years to come from the census, right? And that's power, right? That's that practicing that lowercase democracy, right? At that level. It's how systems start to integrate and operationalize these pieces. So tonight, we're asking our panelists to talk about what this means for us to practice co-governing. What will this require of us? What can we learn from others who are doing this work, from those who have been doing it, from their cultural roots in Native nations, to those who are seated or at different tables around land use, and as well as thinking about for a broader community which is what our speaker Ana Vergara will talk to, representing the Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs. What we also know is that true to our program, Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute, is that we know practicing governance needs to happen at that very local level. And what we know is sometimes just who is there matters a lot too. Currently, right now, we just got, there's this huge report that the Secretary of State puts out that Chai and I are the only people that read it, frankly. And so that looks at the numbers, the demographics about who is seated on state boards and commissions. Granted, it's a point in time count, but what we know is it's about 11.25% of the members at the state levels are from BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. This doesn't include city or county ones, okay? This is just the state level report. But compared to our relative population, and just in Minnesota alone, BIPOC communities are about 21% of our population. So we're not even at parity at those tables. So if we know we're not at those tables, how will we know our community's voices are heard? How will we make sure, our outcomes are represented, right? And we're seeing that play out in so many ways, right? We're seeing everyone keeps saying what COVID laid bare to the impact on BIPOC communities, and certainly what recovery will look like after this pandemic. And so tonight's speakers will be talking about how they practice this, how we start to think about embedding it, and that we hope there will be some good discussions tonight as we move into our collective Q&A session. And so with that being said, that kind of lays the groundwork of where we're going to get started. I'm going to kick us off with our speakers. And I'm actually, Chai's going to introduce our speakers tonight.
All right. Our wonderful speakers tonight, we have three folks who join us for this evening. The first person is Ana Vergara. She was an alum from the last BCLI cohort with us. Ana is the current board vice chair of the Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs. She's passionate about workers' rights advocacy and is a senior investigator at the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. Previously, Ana helped kick off the Minnesota Attorney General's wage theft unit. And she holds a master's in human rights from the Humphrey School. Wayne, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name. Is it Duchesneau?
Duchesneau.
All right, thanks, Wayne. Wayne is the executive director of the Native Government Center, a Native-led nonprofit organization whose mission is to help tribes grow through their capacity to exercise sovereignty. Before joining Native Governance Center, Wayne served one term on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Council representing the people of District 4, with 2 years spent as tribal vice chairman. Prior to being elected to this position, he was the administrative officer of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and spent time as the Cheyenne River Motel General Manager. He was a Native Nation rebuilder from Cohort 3. And Adrian Pearman works at Genesis Works as College and Career Success Program Manager. Adrian currently sits on the St. Paul Planning Commission and is one of the organizers of the annual Central Honor Solando Castile celebration. And he's a member of the Neighbors United Funding Collaborative. He is a past board member of the Hallie Q. Brown Center. And each speaker will get 15 minutes to speak, and I will be keeping the time. And so we'll go by the order of introduction. So Ana, you want to start? Ana, you're muted if you're speaking.
Is Ana, I don't know, yeah, is Ana on the call? Hopefully she'll log in soon. Why don't we'll go ahead and turn to Wayne. So we'll have Wayne kick us off.
Okay.
You ready then? Can you hear me? Excellent. Hami takepi, chante washte na pe chiusapi, itazi trao wantala, lakote machiapi na, Wayne Duchesneau washichu machiapi. Hello, my relatives. I greet you all with a good heart and a handshake. My Lakota name is Itazib Cha Wantala, which roughly translates to straight shooter. I'm better known as Wayne Duchesneau, Executive Director of Native Governance Center. I want to start off tonight by thanking Terry for that wonderful land acknowledgement. It's a practice I feel it's important to help folks realize that us as Native people, we are still here. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the homelands of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Nation that holds 4 bands of the Lakota people and shares geography with the state of South Dakota. I'd ask you all tonight as we go through our conversation to consider the traditional homelands where you're calling in from tonight. Before I dive in, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our organization. A Native Governance Center, like Chai so greatly introduced, we're a Native-led nonprofit that helps tribes grow their capacity to exercise sovereignty. We do that through 3 different types of programming. We do direct tribal governance support that sees us reach out to elected tribal leaders, find issues of governance that they're facing, and help bring resources to community-driven solutions. We have a leadership development program that empowers Native change makers to strengthen their communities through the Native Nation Rebuilders Program. And we do community engagement, which we aspire to educate, engage, and share information with a broader community around topics related to sovereignty, nation rebuilding, and Indian country in general. I want to start off tonight to talk about the unique status of tribes, a little bit about what tribal governments do, and then I'll dive into some of the challenges and opportunities in regards to co-governance. So when we examine Native nations, people must consider that not only are Indigenous people a racial distinction, as census would classify us, but we also have a unique political relationship with local, state, and the federal government. Tribal governments are sovereign, self-governing entities, and when thinking about issues of co-governance, local, county, and state governments that share geography with Native nations have some unique things to consider. This uniqueness presents a variety of challenges and opportunities, and I'd like to briefly go over some information about tribal governments to start us off. But before I get going, I didn't tell Terry I was going to do this, so I hope it's okay. I have a couple questions I want to ask folks. So please type your response in the chat. I think we have the chat function working, is that right? All right. Can people tell me, anyone guess, how many federally recognized tribes there are in the United States? And just please put your answer in the chat. And I know I have at least 2 of my staff on the call, so you all can't answer. Oh, Octavia, right away, 534. We're getting close. There's a lot of numbers coming in. Thank you all. I don't see the right number yet. Sorry, my chat's up here. That's why I'm looking. We got a couple folks close. All right, there are actually 574 federally recognized tribal nations that share geography with the United States of America. And someone already got the answer, so don't scroll in the chat because I have another follow-up question. How many tribes in the state of Minnesota? Nope, quite a few more people that know that answer. So for those of you that are answering 11, you're correct. There are 11 tribal nations in the state of Minnesota, 7 Anishinaabe tribes, and 4 Dakota communities.
I'm sorry, how many did you say were the 574 represents what?
574 total federally recognized tribes.
Oh, okay.
And there are 11 in the state of Minnesota. Thank you all for humoring with that. I love to be a little bit interactive as I'm presenting things. So I appreciate you helping me out with that. Tribal sovereignty allows nations to decide how they govern themselves. Many tribes have their own constitutions that outline how their governments work and how they work with the federal government, state government, and local governments. Tribal constitutions are as diverse as they are numerous. Some tribal constitutions establish 3 branches of government. Some tribal constitutions still operate in a theocracy and have religious folks that help seat governmental officials. Some constitutions are well written and documented. They are, on 1-inch margins with 11-point type, and some constitutions are still passed on orally from people to people. So what's that main takeaway? That there are no 2 tribal governments that are the same. What are some of the things that tribal governments do? They create and enforce laws. They have ability to tax their citizens and non-citizens living within their borders. They also provide services to citizens and non-citizens, including law enforcement, judicial systems, EMS systems, you name it, tribal governments normally do it. They also help meet critical needs for community by managing natural resources, providing healthcare and educational opportunities, and they're also innovative. Tribal nations you'll often find on the front lines of things, everything including energy development, wind development, solar development, to connecting their tribal citizens through with high-speed internet. And oftentimes, as they're doing this for their communities, they're bringing non-Indian community along with them. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also acknowledge at Native Governance Center that the more control tribes have over their own governments, the more likely they are to be successful. So I know I mentioned in the spirit of co-governance, I wanted to highlight a couple different types of successes and challenges that tribal nations have faced, and I'll use some local examples to our region. The first one I want to talk about was, it was lifted up actually as one of the most successful policing agreements in recent tribal state history, and that was with the Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe in eastern South Dakota. The community of Flandreau is really small. It's the headquarters of the Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe. It's just about a 20-minute drive north of on I-90 from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And for a long time, they had a really strong police agreement with the local municipality and the tribe. They won a couple of national awards recognizing how great it went. And then there was an election that happened on the city side, and the city fathers decided that they wanted to throw that agreement out. And so what it ended up doing is causing a lot more heartache, a lot more headaches for cross-jurisdictional issues that the tribe and the city of Flandreau faced. It allowed for less cooperation and more confrontation. And I know the Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe is really working hard to try to repair and rebuild that agreement. Just gonna harp on the one kind of negative. Like I said, it was really great to begin with, but then it kind of went under. Three great examples I want to share with you all about the good work that can come from co-governance. I'll start with the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community. So I'm sure most people here are familiar with them. They're located in the Shakopee Prior Lake area, Mystic Lake Casino. You all, I'm sure, know that enterprise. But what a lot of folks don't know is how much the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community invests in their local community, how they're the largest employer for their county, how they've helped to build infrastructure projects like a water processing plant to great green initiatives like a recycling center. And it's been a long time for the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community to make those types of agreements with local officials to ensure that they're trying to do it for the benefit of all. That's one of the things that you're always going to find with tribal nations and Native nations when they're doing this work. They're doing it for the benefit of all. And another great example of that that's kind of more timely and more recent is take a broad look at COVID-19 vaccine rollouts throughout the country. You have many tribal nations who, because of their unique status and relationship with the federal governments, are getting a lot of ready-made access to the COVID-19 vaccines. Are they excluding non-Indians on their reservation and only vaccinating tribal members? No. You see more and more that tribal nations are opening up their vaccinations so that non-member residents of their reservation are allowed to get COVID vaccine along with their tribal citizens. The final great example I'd like to give you all is, I don't know if we have any state employees here, but the state of Minnesota does a fantastic state tribal relations training where they bring together state officials with tribal nations. They host it on a rotating basis in times when we can meet in person on one of the various 11 reservations in Minnesota. And they help the state officials understand core concepts of tribal sovereignty and Indigenous nations. It stemmed from a really tough time prior to this training where a culvert washed out on the Grand Portage Reservation. The state come in and try to dig up roads and do things on the tribe's land without asking. And so it caused a lot of friction. And what it really did is hurt everybody because everyone wanted the culvert repaired. And sorry, got my sister trying to call. Everyone wanted the culvert repaired, but they didn't go about it the proper way. So it ended up delaying the practice by several weeks. Now that the state tribal relations training goes on, state officials are more cognizant of tribal law, tribal jurisdictions, and they're able to move projects forward in a better way. And I'd kind of like to lastly leave you that for folks to understand that tribal nations also have accesses to resources, both their own and federal, that can really help boost local economies and help them further development. And I see like I just have a couple minutes left, so I think I'll end there, turn it over to the next person, and wait for questions. Thank you all.
Thanks, Wayne. You actually had 3 minutes left, but Adrian, are you ready to go?
And I know there's some questions in the chat, so Wayne, if you want to respond there, but we're going to do a collective Q&A in a little bit too. So if there's quick clarifying questions, I would ask you put them in the chat, but otherwise, yeah, we will have some good time to process the things that we've heard too in breakout rooms in a little bit.
Am I going or is Wayne? Oh, it's all right. The floor is mine. What's up? My name is Adrian Perryman. I he, him, his pronouns. I am coming to you from St. Paul. I am a volunteer on the St. Paul Planning Commission, amongst other things. I do other things here and there, but the views and opinions expressed tonight are those of me and not of the Planning Commission, Department of Planning and Economic Development, or the City of St. Paul, just so nobody gets in trouble for what I say and ramble on about. But that's one of the advantages of being a volunteer service, is that you can kind of speak your mind and say what you want without having to really get in trouble. Worst case scenario, I just have one less meeting on my schedule for the week. So I like to keep it real when I can. Yeah, so this is an image of what the Planning Commission meeting would be if it were in person. We've been doing virtual stuff, of course. Terry can, of course, jump in and give experience from the Planning Commission. I'm definitely not an expert on any of these topics. I just have experience with it, and I want to talk about some of the things. I'll talk some about what the Planning Commission does and how that relates to equity within the city. But of course, there's history plays into it big time, because so many decisions that have happened around zoning and land and where things are built and what can be built have played a huge role, from redlining to the Rondo neighborhood, all sorts of different things that were determined by people sitting on boards and commissions and councils and volunteer individuals making huge decisions for the city and county and state and beyond. But zoning is what the Planning Commission focuses on. It's just basically, yeah, what can be built where. There can be a business here, a home there. Businesses here can be this height. They have to have sidewalks this size. They have to have this amount of parking, those different things. But it plays a huge role into our daily lives. There's I was never big on history, but looking into things, there's a website or a blog called Every Map is the Same, where it overlays different maps with zoning and different things, and the places where certain zoning is allowed and not allowed. It relates to the BIPOC communities that live there, whether there are food deserts. It's even goes into COVID cases, all sorts of different things, high asthma rates, police violence, all sorts of different things are dictated a lot by where people are allowed to live across the city, county, state, and country. Yeah, so currently, yeah, just other things I'm involved with here and there. I like to go to a lot of meetings and hear people ramble. This is an old picture of the Planning Commission. You might see some familiar faces, but it's a 21-member advisory board made up of citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. And we work on zoning, comprehensive neighborhood planning, and transportation, and various things. So a lot of random meetings. People come and usually upset about things. People rarely show up when they want to celebrate, but it's very important for people to come up and speak to topics, and I'll talk more about that as well. But I will say about the Planning Commission, it's the long game. Today I'm going to talk about a handful of situations, but those are from 5 years. It's usually conditional use permits, non-conforming permits. Somebody wants to build a garage, but they don't have enough space, so they have to get permission from their neighbors, all sorts of different things. So it's not always exciting, but it is a big benefit when being in the right place at the right time when certain things are happening. And I'll talk about some of the cases that I felt were important or interesting in comparison to the other ones, and how they sort of play into equity within the city. So one example you may be familiar with is the former church that was, I can't remember the name, but the St. Andrew's Church, yes, in the Como Park neighborhood. People wanted to preserve it, save it. Other people wanted to tear it down so they could build, renovate a charter school. There was a lot of things at play, charter schools versus historic preservation versus all sorts of different things. So we had to decide on that, whether it was designated historic and was able to be saved. We decided that it was not historic and it was eventually torn down. A lot of people were upset about that. But we felt that, yeah, that building being there wasn't providing as much as the opportunities for a school. Again, if you're on the commission, you can sort of make these decisions and how it plays into stuff. Other stuff we talk about, definition of family. This one is still being worked on, but yeah, the definition of family, who can live in certain houses. It's designed to prevent slumlords from throwing 30 people into a house and having unsafe living conditions, but it really affects a lot of communities who may live closer together as families throughout the years and may have a larger number of people living in one home, and it's perfectly fine for them, but sometimes the code does not allow that. So adjusting it to make it safe for everyone, but accessible for everyone else. Another stuff relates to zoning. So a lot of times people will come to the commission or their district councils and they want things to change. This example was people who lived on Marshall. Most of them were affluent with nice houses and they didn't want the value of their homes to change. They didn't like that they were developing apartments nearby, so they came together and were able to get some stuff moved through where they were trying to down zone, which would not allow this apartment building to be built. Came to the planning commission one way, and then it goes to the city council another way. But people, the way the equity, we try and get equity within there is trying to treat things equally. Just because these 30 people have the time to come to a meeting and speak their mind and have the time and legal knowledge to do that doesn't mean that's representative of the entire city. So trying to make sure that all voices are heard in these decisions. Eventually this building was built. We were able to, the zoning rule was changed actually at the city council to allow for this development and more homes. Another thing that we've talked about is alternative financial establishments. So payday loans, check cashing. Of course, there's many sides on this, but a lot of people view them as harmful and taking advantage of communities. So there was rules on where they could be built. Something came to the planning commission about whether or not they should be built closer to homes. We decided to not allow them, so making sure that they're further away. But then again, it's difficult because if there's no banks there either, what do citizens do? So a lot of opinions on both sides. This other one was the Fort Side development that's going on now. This was a few years ago where we tried to decide what would be allowed in certain places. Should this be townhomes, row houses, single family homes, senior living? The different colors there show the different spaces. The planning commission did one thing, the city council did a different thing. That has led partially to some stuff that's going on now. Again, this is my opinions. This is from a Fox News article talking about the lots at the Ford site that are selling for $475,000 up to $1.15 million. Of course, there's other housing there too. There are row homes and apartments and things there, but those are just $1 million pieces of land. That's not even the house. The house will need to be built on top of that. So that's usually not accessible for a lot of people. So our point was trying with equity and equality, those are the houses that are overlooking the river. Why do only the potentially most affluent of the city get to have those river views? Why couldn't that be an apartment building? Kid growing up, seeing that every day leads to many things in life. So that's what we're trying to do there. But again, it's very difficult with the limited ability of the planning commission. Another thing was with accessory dwelling units. So Airbnb, there wasn't any rules around that, but should there be rules? There's studies on accessory dwelling units where people are just using their residence as Airbnbs instead of allowing long-term people to live there. So they're just making a lot of money off people coming in for the Super Bowl or whatever, when that home could be used for low-income individuals who need that housing year-round. So trying to figure out what rules and how to make it accessible for all and manage it properly. And then the most recent one that's been going on is the Lattice development, Lexington Station Apartments, where a developer came in, so on Lexington between University and 94, wanted to develop some market rate apartments. Market rates means they can charge whatever they want pretty much. There's different studies on affordability with area median income, where the Twin Cities area median income includes like Edina and other parts. So it's a large swath of income. So it doesn't really represent the city of St. Paul when people say there is affordable housing at a certain amount of AMI. Again, I'm rambling on about things, but basically they came in, they wanted to develop something. The Planning Commission only has a certain amount of power. We can't say, oh, we just don't like it. We wish it was cheaper. That's not within our what we can do, but we were able to look at some things and decide that we felt it did not go with some of the comprehensive planning rules and different things. So we're able to get it stopped at the Planning Commission, but then again, it is being appealed at the City Council, so it's still ongoing. We were basically tired of developers coming in and saying, oh, we want to build this high-priced apartment in this land, and not really considering the neighbors around them, and there wasn't really anything the city has put in place. So we're hoping that future discussions are going to happen within the city to try and prioritize affordability and different things for the community. But again, the Planning Commission only has so much power with what we can do. The City Council has different power, the mayor has different power. So those are just some of the things. And then when we talk about, this is just one example of what happened. The Frogtown neighborhood group put this image together. It's talking about that the vote on that specific development. It was, you all don't know these individuals, but it was almost exactly down the BIPOC color lines, the people who voted to deny the development, all but 2 identify as BIPOC. And on the other side, the ones that voted to build this development, they put on the voted with and voted against community. That's their words. I'm not denying those words, but the individuals who voted to try and get the apartments developed, all but 1 identified as white. So that's just a stark example of representation and different things and where people are at there. So yeah, so that is just some examples of things, but with the specific questions I was asked around, where are there opportunities to integrate racially equitable outcomes in policies and practices? Right now, the Planning Commission is really just working on equality. It's hard to get to equity the way rules are set up. We're basically trying to get equal representation so that if somebody comes to the city, they got in trouble for going against code 5 times and we let them slide, and then somebody comes in next week with the same thing, but they are an immigrant business owner and the city comes down harder on them, trying to make sure each one is treated equally. So whether it's letting both slide or holding both accountable. Representation in the Planning Commission is a big one too. We're very racially diverse. We represent all parts of the city, but then again, to be a part of the Planning Commission, you have to be able to have time Friday mornings at 8:30 to come to this meeting, virtually or in person. So trying to get representation, there's a lot of property owners, not as much socioeconomic diversity. Yes, it's hard to get things going the way they're set up with the rules and laws of the city. So trying to get those things changed at a higher level. An example of with development, if you do something wrong, you'll get sued by the organization. So there was the example of the Starbucks on Marshall and Snelling in St. Paul, where they were doing things wrong and messing up traffic, all sorts of different things. But if St. Paul wants to fight Starbucks, it's going to be very difficult because Starbucks has more money than the city of St. Paul. So how do they fight that fight when there's not much they can do with that? So it's just interesting to see how that goes down. But the other ways, with universal design, curb cuts benefiting certain people, but will ultimately benefit all people. So trying to get those in place as well. But To finish, yeah, one thing I wish I had known about the Planning Commission before I joined was that you don't have to be an expert on these things. Just bringing your own experience to the table is there. The city staff is there to translate and tell you how things work. I'm not a zoning expert, but just my experience thinking of reading things and analyzing, oh, that's not right, that shouldn't be like that, and bringing those questions up. And a lot of times like, oh, we didn't think about that. I'm glad you brought that up, or just supporting things or being at the table. So again, it's a long game, but it is hopefully will make a huge difference in the lives of our citizens for years to come. And that's all I have to ramble on about for now.
Thanks, Adrian. Up next, we have our last speaker, Anna. Anna, you ready to go?
Yeah, let me see how I can share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Well, hi everyone, my name is Anna. I recently just graduated with the program last year, 2020. So, I've been on this council in the middle of a pandemic, so we've had a lot to discuss. So today I'm going to talk about the Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs. For those of you that don't know, the governor has ethnic councils. And really the purpose behind that is to make sure that, we're listening to voices of communities of color as we're thinking about different policies at the state level. All right, let me figure out how I can go to my next slide here. All right, so the mission of MCLA is to advise and inform the governor and legislators on matters of importance to Latinos in Minnesota. That sounds super fancy, but really all it is, think about the pandemic and the issues that might have impacted our communities of color, like food scarcity or our workforce, and having a ton of people, catch coronavirus while working on at the job. Those things that you might regularly talk to your folks at home or your friends, all of a sudden, we get a platform to talk about it at the state level, give that information to an executive director that works for Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs. And then that executive director would bring that to the attention of the governor or maybe a committee, a decision maker for us. And so the way that the council works is they track state legislation, they analyze policy, procedures, laws, regulations, and one of the strongest ways for us to make our arguments or make our points is to have research, right, that backs that up, maybe use research from different data. That's an example. The council was established in 1978. It was first called the Council of the Affairs of Spanish-Speaking People. That has obviously now changed. For the Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs, it's people that have an ethnic heritage from Mexico, Central or South America, Cuba, Dominican Republic, or Puerto Rico. There are 15 voting members, and 11 of those are public members. So the way it works is you might see an opening online, but you can't just apply to anyone. You have to make sure you know what district you're in, and try to figure out when that seat in your district will open up. So something that's been really wonderful has been I've been able to meet with Latino leaders, not just from the metro area, because there's a lot of leaders, I would say, in the metro area, but from rural communities as well. And 4 legislators also sit on our council. I've been able to meet some really wonderful people through that, like our first Latina senator, Patricia Torres-Rey, is someone that currently participates on that. So really it's an opportunity to not just talk about the issues, but if you're like me, for example, that works in public service, works in government, it's a great opportunity to just talk to strong leaders that will help you get to where you want to get in the future, because we're a very small pool. So duties of the council, talk about issues impacting the Latino community, present data to departments and legislative committees. So for example, and this is the lovely Rosa Tak, she's the current executive director of MCLA. So her and her staff will put the agenda together for us. We'll talk about some of the issues. We'll start the conversation for us. And last year, some of the things that we discussed as a council were the pandemic and how it impacted Worthington and meatpacking plants, for example. There were really big outbreaks in those areas. I work in the Department of Labor, even got complaints about them. So, it's just an example of one of the issues that we talked about. We also discussed health disparities. We were really lucky that our executive director actually has a background in public health, so she could really advocate for us. And I know that we have our own separate duties, but one really cool thing about the ethnic councils is if there's something at the legislature where we can all come in together and support, that's a really powerful voice. So I know right now that, there's a huge push for, more teachers of color, for example, in our schools and representation. So that's just one example. Ultimately, we're trying to figure out, what are the changes needed for our communities to be better served. You'll work directly with legislators to do that. You might even develop legislation. And of course, this one thing the state is always asking the council for advice on is recommendations to make their affirmative action plans stronger. And if there are organizations out in your community, so let's say Clues, for example, Clues is an organization that serves the Latinx community in West St. Paul. Let's say that there is a trend that they're seeing with the families that they're helping. We can act as a liaison to bring some of the issues that they're experiencing to the table. So that's just a broad, these are just broad examples of our roles and what they look like. The Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs, we actually meet quarterly. So it might be less than some of the other committees that folks are on currently. Challenges and opportunities of working on behalf of the whole community. Challenges. The challenges I can think of are more within the board, sometimes getting more people to take on the leadership roles when we create committees, but generally, I think we come to a really strong consensus on what are the issues that we want to focus on right now, especially with the pandemic. We have come to a consensus really quick on priority items. One really good opportunity for me is, I work in public service. I work for the Minnesota Department of Labor. There might be things that I can see in state government as a public servant that I can't really move and shake too much as an employee, but I can turn around and talk to MCLA and have them talk to the governor or legislators to maybe keep the commissioner, at my agency accountable and make sure that, maybe they're being inclusive. Maybe we're not, making sure that we're having a more positive impact on our labor force of color rather than negative. So things like this that I have found super helpful. And that's really it for the Minnesota Council of Latino Affairs. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Anna. Terry, I think we're moving to breakout rooms, right? Terry, you're on mute.
Oh, geez. All right. And Anna, could you, yes, not stop sharing your screen so we can share the instructions. So we've heard really amazing things um, from our speakers tonight, right? We've heard sovereign nation to state government practices of co-governing together, truly side by side. We'd heard of governing at the local level, so addressing and embedding equity at those levels, and what does that mean to embed racial equity? And then we've just heard from Anna talking about at a state level and a community collective level too. For what does that mean, right? As they start to think about integrating where what they're doing into the state practices, right? Not following from the legislation, but also addressing community needs, immediate community needs. So I've heard three really different things. And we're actually going to do something that we always do at our issue series now, which is something called a collective Q&A. So now I have to share my screen, which is this process of, so where we are going to move into breakout rooms. So we've heard interesting analysis. I know some folks have some burning questions right now, but what I have to, this happened because you go to events and you're like, did you hear what I heard? Or did you, what do you think about what's happening? So we're going to put everybody into breakout rooms to do this kind of debrief and reflection, right? What did you hear that was compelling? Were you like, this is crazy? Or what more questions do you have? Try to just drop the instructions in there. And your task as each breakout room is to come up with one collective question for our panelists. They can either be for all of our panelists or they can be for an individual speaker. And so we will give folks about 20 minutes and try to pre-assign people to random breakout rooms. You'll be in groups of probably 5 or 6. And then we'll ask you to come back after about 20 minutes with your collective questions. So please introduce yourselves, pronouns in your breakout rooms. This is our virtual community building effort. So we'll see you back in about 20 minutes. Chai will give you all those lovely warnings. And even for folks, I know some folks have called in, you'll be on the line too. So please be cognizant that we do have people who have called in who won't be on screen. But happy discussion, and we'll see you in 20 minutes when we come back and with your task. So come back with your question, your collective question. Yep, the rooms are open. So if you just click join meeting, you should go in the room. And if you have any problems, you can come back to the main room here. Chai and I will be here for questions. So I think speakers are assigned rooms too, right, Chai? Or?
Oh, no.
Oh, speakers will stay here. Yeah, speakers will stay here. All right. All right.
Chai, I'm not seeing a link. Is it something I'm doing wrong?
Sean, you should be able to just, everyone was just, let me double check to see where you are assigned. Okay, that's where I don't see you on the list of the breakout room.
It's not joined. Yeah, I'm gonna add them to room 3, hon.
Okay.
I'm gonna add room 3.
Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully you should get an invitation now. And then the phone number too, I'll assign them to room 3 as well. Maybe I can do that on my end.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. It's weird. Oh, I can only see which room I can join on my end.
Yeah. And Nikuli is, oh wait. Is Nikuli your room? Sometimes folks have stepped away too, so. Sean, did you get into your room? I hope folks are.
We're not supposed to be in a room, right?
Yes, we have you here, so they'll come back with questions for you all.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You should be able to go in the participants and just assign Sean a room, can't you?
I did that, and there's something, he should have gotten the invitation, so I don't know if it's his computer or his service, but yeah. I'm gonna pause our recording too. Turn on the recording. I hope you all had great discussions in your small groups. You met some new people or got to know some, or said hello to old friends. But yeah, so I'm gonna have Chet pick a random number and we'll start from there. Pick a for group room. Yeah.
2.
2. So yes. So group 2, do you want to come with your collective question? Someone.
Was that us, DeAndre? Selena? Were we two? Okay, DeAndre, you get it.
DeAndre, that was us.
Okay, DeAndre.
Sorry, I wasn't keeping track of the group number. So our question for Mr. Duchenal, did I say that correctly?
Really close, Duchenal. Yep, thank you.
Duchenal, okay, got it. Thank you. Was with when we at least were thinking of the relationship between like state government and the federal government and tribal entities or government, it feels like very like paternalistic in the sense where the federal government, for example, could decide to revoke a treaty, and similar to the state. And then you think about with the COVID-19 response, we've seen a lot of that in terms of like disparities and the way how the federal government and state is responding to the COVID-19 crisis in Indigenous communities. So all that to say is we were wondering if you could elaborate on how decisions are made when it comes to sharing resources and advocating for more resources, because knowing that the federal government and the state government could decide at any point to make decisions that adversely impact tribes, how does that work?
Great question. So I want to make sure to kind of recap that. So you all were talking about the paternalistic nature, specifically of the relationship between the federal government vis-a-vis tribes. And your question is, how are resources shared, or how are decisions made moving forward when tribes share resources? Did I get the gist of that?
Yeah, like how are decisions made? Because like when it comes to like, for example, money and dollars and funding programs, a lot of that money comes from the federal government or the state. And so how are decisions made around like how much resources like tribal governments or tribal communities receive, while also like retaining like sovereignty of tribal nations?
Great question, thank you. So I'm gonna try my best to answer. I heard 3 parts there. I don't know how much time I get. I think I get, what, 45 minutes for each question? No, just kidding. I'll quit wasting time. So I think the first thing to let folks know is, and to really understand that really very little state money goes into tribal coffers. Most of the money that comes into tribal nations are either resources or revenue generated on their own, or you're right, through our federal relationship with the federal government and their trust responsibility to Indian country. And so whether that's direct funding for projects or upholding their responsibility to tribal nations in the realm of healthcare or education, how decisions are made is our tribal governments in the state of Minnesota in particular all operate under a council system and those numbers range in size from 5 to, I think, 15 is the largest in Minnesota. And it's like a regular government, like you all would understand. So they're born in and authorized of constitutions, and their people elect folks to tribal council and executive positions to make decisions on behalf of their tribal nations. And tribes are free to wield their sovereignty within their jurisdiction, and in some cases outside their jurisdiction, as much as the state and the federal government. Sometimes they don't appreciate how much we do, right? I think another thing to consider is that tribes also contribute a great more to state and local economies than is the inverse, right? So I mentioned earlier the example of the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community being the largest employer for Scott County, I believe. And so when we think about the paternalistic relationship in particular between the federal government and tribal nations, you're kind of right? The federal government hasn't really canceled any treaties or revoked them per se. They just outright broke them, right? And so It's oh, I think someone came off mute. And so tribes have recourse though. So when the federal government doesn't live up to an agreement or a state government doesn't live up to an agreement, oftentimes things go to court cases. And so you'll oftentimes see a lot of issues on a lot of native issues rise to the level of the Supreme Court. Why is that? Because, well, in the United States Constitution, under the Supremacy Clause, treaties with tribal nations are, along with the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. So oftentimes when you get these jurisdictional battles that include tribal nations, it has to go up to that highest court in the federal government for decision. And you've seen tribes win some pretty big cases recently. You saw the Crow Nation treaty case that happened last year that allowed for Crow tribal members to hunt off reservation lands in their historical treaty lands. You also heard maybe you've all heard of the McGirt case out of Oklahoma, which basically declared about 3/4 of that state Indian reservation. And so, and man, the state of Oklahoma is scrambling, trying to figure that out. What are they going to do? How do they get around that? So I think while the relationship between the tribes and federal government is paternalistic in nature still in many cases, more and more tribes are exerting sovereignty in stronger and stronger ways, because as they are also resourcing themselves, they're less dependent on other governmental sources of funding. Did I get to everything there?
Yes, thank you. I think it's interesting how you mentioned that like tribes contribute more to like the state coffers, because I see that playing out even this here in the Twin Cities right now with like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and like how much they contribute to the state and how they receive. So I appreciate you answering that question. So thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Great. So we group 2, so room 3, and Magdalena, Sean, a couple other folks there. Mary, your collective question for our panel?
Sure. To great surprise, somehow I got nominated to speak on the behalf of the group. However, they will be chiming in if I get the question wrong. We spent quite a bit of time reflecting, to be quite transparent. What you all shared really resonated with us all, and we understand the breadth of the work that you're trying or been trying to do in your spaces. So the question is, history has recorded the very same issues that you're trying to address today, that you all have been working on. How do you see your participation in these councils? How do you see the recognition, the most recent recognition of tribal nations, as not being purely just symbolic? And also, how do you maintain your resiliency as you do this work? And I can pop that into the chat.
That's 3 questions.
It's combination of questions. So I would say maybe have another, I assume that's for all of our speakers, but does Adrian or maybe Anna want to address that?
Sorry, that was a really big question. The one part that stuck out to me was the resilience piece at the end, just because, talking about diversity and inclusion, we're not just doing it at these councils to make sure that the voices of BIPOC individuals are being heard, at a state level. Like, you're doing it at work, you're doing it with your personal lives, you're doing it with, friends and family. So I think for me, especially this last year, I had to kind of like reevaluate where I was going to spend my time, and maybe thinking, okay, if I want to commit to doing this work well, maybe with MCLA, and also not feel so bogged down as a person of color in the space, constantly having these conversations. Maybe it means I need to go to these other areas of my life, like me running my little nonprofit, and say, like, I'm only committing this much time. That's it. You guys are going to have to go some, having super clear boundaries. Cause I think all these conversations, and not just thinking of the issues that impact me as a Latina, but learning about the issues impacting different ethnicities, it's a lot to carry, and we want to, be able to support each other and have the energy to do that. And I think setting, some clear boundaries of like, where is it that I'm going to do this? I actually, people kept reaching out to me at work, like, hey, can you help with some of this work we're doing around diversity here? And I had to just say like, nah, I'm sorry. I really, really care, but I do it outside of work. I do it for the state. I cannot like do it, in my work setting too. So that was, I just caught like the last piece of your question, and I think I would have to like get your question again in like smaller chunks.
I threw it in the chat for anyone else who wanted to respond to it. Hopefully you can see it, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Invite Adrian or Wayne, any other your reflections on the question?
Yeah, I agree with what Anna said. Yeah, that at my day job, you started a D&I committee. Like, if anyone wants to sign up, come on through. I'm like, no, I don't got. I'm not doing that this time. Because yeah, it can be draining. It's something, my work-life balance I'm trying to figure out, or work volunteer balance. Got a planning commission tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning, and like going back to the example I had of the vote that was 7-8. If I sleep in and don't go to it, who knows? Something that could happen that could harm the city. So it's a lot of pressure on you. And then thinking back of the history of, I live in St. Paul, close to the Rondo area, and the history of that, and trying to represent people. But what I try and do is try and get other people. So I know this is a great pool of people that are either involved or continue to get involved, where it's, so I and 15 other people don't have to serve on different commissions, but we can spread it out and share that work and energy and knowledge is a big thing. But I think great work is being done, so that's what keeps me going. And I'm a social media guy, and so being able to connect with people and share that information a lot easier now. So it is rewarding, and I do feel good at night knowing the work's been done. But I definitely do fall asleep easily doing from the work. Yeah.
I have one more thing to add. I also think that right now we have a lot more opportunity than we did before to be taken seriously, right? We have these like equity officers, for example, at every agency, who are clearly overworked and clearly doing way more than they should be doing. But we have a lot more resources. Thinking about some of the other BIPOC individuals in the workforce, like I just had a conversation with someone this week at the Department of Labor who has a pretty powerful position, but he's been used to kind of like laying low or staying in his lane in order to get where he has gotten. And I get that piece of that, of feeling that way to get into positions of power. But I also think that like in this current moment, we have a lot more tools at our disposal, or resources that we can use to shake things up. Like for me, if there's an issue I can't directly address, with the Department of Labor, I'll turn around, go to like my ethnic council, who can talk to the governor, who can talk to my commissioner, without it like, not me directly going to my commissioner, but like, making it known that there's this issue that's impacting the BIPOC community within this agency. So I'm hopeful, because I think there's a lot more tools and resources at our disposal, and we're being taken a lot more seriously than we might have been in the past.
And Wayne, a quick reflection from you to the question.
I want to address specifically your question and the point on why is participation important, right? So Terry put up the slide earlier that we're at 11% representation across boards in these intergovernmental places and spaces, and our voices need to be heard. It's one of those things that, and we have to become active participants in these systems of colonization in order to smash through. I can think of no important role model in my daughter's life than to see Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, citizen of the White Earth Nation, ascending to the second highest position in Minnesota State's government, right? And those, the question is why do we not see it as symbolic? I think we need those symbols sometimes. We need those symbols for our people to look up to and understand that while we work at the grassroots to change these things, these processes from the bottom up, if we can get in at the top down and meet in the middle, we're going to go about tearing down these colonial systems a lot quicker. And how do you remain resilient? I think for us in our communities, resiliency is in our DNA. It's something that we wouldn't be here if we weren't resilient as people. And so I think the world needs to watch out. I think us folks that have been the underrepresented, the looked over, that resilience, that one of my favorite quotes, right, is they buried us, but they didn't realize we were seeds, right? I truly believe, especially as we work in our organization to indigenize work, that we're cultivating the land to grow the systems that is going to demolish colonization. And so, yeah, that's my answer to the question.
Great. Group 3. Oh, sorry, we went to 3, 4. I can't do math. 4. That was just 3, 4. What's your collective question?
Hi, Jose Luis here, representing Group 4. You know, a lot of we use most of our time to kind of just to engage each other around a lot of what you all have answered, the other questions around how do we work within systems that are built to not benefit us? How do we work within systems that promote unhealthy communities and disfranchisement? Was kind of like our question. How do you continue that work? I feel like some of you have already answered it. But I think one thing that comes to mind that we came up with was the long game strategy. How do you continue a long game strategy while centering those most vulnerable and centering what is sacred?
Any one of our panelists, speakers want to reflect on that?
And for the planning commission, it's we meet every other week, and then we have committee meetings those alternating weeks, and it's a lot of information, a lot of documents, a lot of different things. But fortunately, everything's on the net. So having that database to go back and search, like I remember we talked about this came up 2 years ago, and searching through that stuff and getting your case ready when you have to talk about things. But you're not going to store it all up top, but having sort of those memories and counting on your fellow commissioners, also counting on the staff that work in these positions to ask them those questions, and potentially putting work on them to do some research and get the information, because it is there's been multiple times where, like, we talked about this like 3 months ago, very similar situation, and bringing that back up and comparing and contrasting it. So using your resources to remember stuff is very important.
Anybody else have a question about the long game and centering community in the long game?
I can take a crack. So great question. You all, like, this, put people in groups and have them come out with like super Jeopardy questions is a fantastic process. So when I think about centering the long game, right, and centering it on the most vulnerable and the most sacred, I harken back and think about the indigenous principle of thinking for 7 generations, right? And oftentimes that's explained in thinking about, making decisions today that's going to affect the next 7 generations out. But I have a great friend and mentor from the Southwest, Regis Pecos, who talks about 7 generations in a little different concept that helps it center on exactly what you're talking about, the most vulnerable and the most sacred. And it's place yourself in the center of those 7 generations. So many people, oftentimes not in our communities, but many people in this country have the ability to know their parents, their grandparents, and their great-grandparents. So 3 generations back. And many of us are fortunate enough to know our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. So when you think of that 7 generation concept with you in the center, it allows you to harness your focus in the present time, right? And really take a look at learning the lessons from the 3 behind you to shape our path and our decisions for the 3 in front of us, but also taking into account where we're at currently in the space and time, right? So when I think about how, from an indigenous perspective, we center around those 2 very important things, those who are most vulnerable and those who are most sacred. It's about an inward reflection first. So the most fundamental, and I'll speak for Lakota society because I'm a member of the Lakota Nation. Our most fundamental political unit was the Tiwahi, or your family, right? So mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, and kids. Our next fundamental unit of governance was the Tioshpae, so your extended family. And then it went on and up from there, right? And so if you work first to take care of you and yours close to you, that allows you the space and time to care for your extended family. And then as extended families come together, they can take care of larger and larger. And eventually we're all taking care of ourselves because we're centered in this concept and that principle. So that would be my thought to how we do that as Indigenous people.
Thank you. Let's go to
That was
room.
beautiful.
That was
I don't
beautiful.
have a lot to add to that besides just with a long game being strategic, think about who are the power players, depending on what you're trying to do. My organization, if I want things to change at a state level with the agency I'll be at, for a long time, because I want to influence the workforce, labor force here in Minnesota, I have to think of whose trust do I want to gain? Who are those allies? And what can we do with this space?
Thank you. Group 5, am I on track now? Group 5, what was your collective question?
We had a collective question, but it is almost exactly the same as multiple questions. So if I can take the liberty of changing it to, what does it mean to, our original question was, what does it mean to co-govern when one of the parties you're co-governing with has more resources, positional power than the other? But I think and we were gonna ask Wayne, but maybe this question to Wayne is, what is, I guess, when it's not just co-governing, it's multiple parties at the table, how does that interaction between state, local, and sovereign nations work, specifically in relationship to line 3?
Oh, fantastic question. And so, so I'll answer it in terms of, first of all, letting folks know I in no way, shape, or form speak for the Indigenous populations, the tribal nations of the state of Minnesota. So what you're going to get here is definitely my feeling on that question as just a Lakota person who is always concerned and worried about my relatives, right? And so it kind of goes back to the other question, in consideration of pipeline constructions, other environmentally non-sustainable actions that other forces take that intrude on, override, go through, over and under Indigenous nations. I would just let folks know the reason we fight so hard is because we understand we get one earth, right? The state of Minnesota is truly blessed in the amount of fresh water that you all have, and water is going to be the gold in the future, right? And so Indigenous folks oftentimes take these stances because we understand that we have to live in symbiosis with nature. We have to make sure that we're taking care of Mother Nature so that she can continue to take care of us. How that plays out in co-governance, right, is tribal nations get to assert their sovereignty. They get to stand up and say no when they want to say no. Sometimes they win those fights, sometimes they lose those fights, but every time our voice is heard. And things like energy development aren't, tribal nations, just like other BIPOC communities, were not monoliths. So there are some tribal nations that do energy development. There are some that vehemently oppose it. And the one thing that I think local, state governments all have to do is they have to respect the sovereignty of the tribes where they're at and understand whether it's a pipeline, whether it's putting a pipeline through the state of Minnesota or the one they put under the Missouri River by Standing Rock a few years ago, because they didn't want to put it north of Bismarck because they didn't want to jeopardize people's drinking water, right? But we'll put it north of a reservation where there's not that many Indians there. We can jeopardize that, right? What happened? Standing Rock rose, y'all. There were upwards of 10,000 people there standing with the Standing Rock Sioux tribes. recognition of support of indigenous peoples, not only from the 574 recognized tribes in the United States, but from across the world, saying, you all need to stand up and you need to listen to indigenous people on these type of issues. So I think that's the important thing in consideration of co-governance is for those state and local officials to understand that it's a lot easier to work with tribes towards the future than it is to work in opposition.
Oh, yes. Truth, truth, truth. I'm going to move on to group 6. And then I see group 7. Thank you very much. Somebody dropped the question in the chat. But group 6, what was your collective question? I'm going to Stephanie, Steve, Tracy, Tori.
Oh, I didn't remember what group number we were. So
Okay.
I was just like, I don't know. Steve has a question for our group.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank Mr. Wayne and Miss Anna, for all that you have done for the community. But my main question goes to Andrea, and that's because I want to know when these developers come into a neighborhood and say what they're gonna do. I want to know if they own, if they are owners of a new development, or where do they get the authority? And also, I want to know how we can stop them to be equivalent to them before they can just come in, tell us what they're gonna do, and push us out. And I think we need to learn how to stand up against them and give us respect, because we have history here. The Black community, the natives, all of that in the Rondo community. So, Mr. Andrea, I would like to know how we can deal with these developers before they make their moves.
Thanks, Stephen. It's actually Adrian, but go ahead, Adrian.
All good, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I sometimes I give presentation to students about involvement and like join boards, commissions, and then I end it by saying you can do all that, or you can become just stupid, dumb, rich and throw your money around. Of course, that's a little difficult, but that is, to one answer to your question would be go back in time and accumulate generational wealth and businesses and things like that and have enough money. Because if you got, I don't know how many million it is, but the Atlantis project with the space by Wilder, if you got $60 million, you can buy that land and build something. I don't know anyone who has that, so it's very difficult. So it's the discussions we're having. I don't know the answer because we try to get people to do things out of the kindness of their heart. Like, you're going to make $20 million off this development. Would you mind giving us $100,000 of that profit? Usually it's, they're not making any, they don't have to. That's either people say an act of God or act of Congress, the only thing that make people do stuff. People, greed, whatever else it is. Bezos could buy all of St. Paul and develop it if we wanted to, but they're not doing that because it's not going to make them money. So it's a long game. It's trying to, power in numbers is the biggest part that I've seen, is getting groups together, having action on the street, whether it's protesting, action in the city council, action in the governor's office, all sorts of different things, action in the communities to get some noise made so they can't do it as easily. And hopefully time will come where people will be willing to share their funds. My push has been trying to get government groups to put up money, because we subsidize libraries, parks, all sorts of different things. We know they're not making any money. Why can't we do that for other stuff? Like, why can't we build this house and have it, or other things like that? So that's what I'm trying to figure out, who has the funds and how we can do these sort of things. Or there's the community development where I have $5,000 and find a bunch of other people with $5,000 and pool our money together. So there's a lot of options, but ultimately it's finding some dollars, unfortunately.
Thank you. And now I'll ask group 7, who, if anyone's still left in group 7, the question was also dropped into the chat. If you could just read the questions, and someone kindly posted it there. So I have Alex and Angela C.
Yeah, it was Desiree's question. Did Desiree already leave?
Yeah, but she kindly dropped it in the chat. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, I'm not
I was
following.
gonna say, I thought we already went, but okay.
No, we haven't gone, but I haven't been following along with the chat, so I'm gonna see if I can just repeat it.
I just popped it back in the chat.
Oh, okay, thank
Thanks,
you,
Wayne.
Wayne. I'm just trying to sorry, chat. Okay, you're here. Okay. In the concept of co-governance, have any of you worked to develop anti-racist governance processes? I'm curious about your thoughts on how to create governance that is accountable to BIPOC-led work that doesn't recreate white supremacy without white people. So essentially wanting to create a model that works for BIPOC folks, but not really relying on already a very racist model, which tends to happen sometimes in BIPOC organizations. And she didn't say who she wanted it directed to, so I open it up to everybody. I would love to hear everybody's perspective from the panel. Angela, would you agree?
Yeah, I kind of thought that's what we thought we was gonna do.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were gonna ask one person or everybody, but yeah. Awesome. So.
I'm reading that and I'm shaking my head because I think the state of Minnesota has so far to go because we have, we have like diversity groups, and then we have like they're supposed to be our people of color groups where we can talk candidly. But honestly, we have like our white supervisors that are still able to participate on those. So I think that there's still work in terms of getting like groups together where BIPOC can talk honestly without having to worry about power dynamics still. That's what I'm seeing like on the ground as a state worker.
Yeah. I also think Angela, Desiree was trying to get to the point about when you see BIPOC organizations wanting to collaborate and co-organize, that they find themselves relying on the same systems that they're trying to get away from in the way they design their process as well, is what she was also saying. Thank you for that.
Any of the other panelists have any thoughts or reflections about that question?
I could go. Great question. It's fundamentally what we do at Native Governance Center. We the one thing, another unique thing about Indian country in general, right, is most of our system of governance were forced upon us in the 1930s under an act of Congress called the Indian Reorganization Act. And what this was made tribes all adopt very similar boilerplate constitutions. So quite frankly, we were easier to deal with, right? So instead of having to do treaties with each separate tribe every time, here you all organize yourself under these rules so that we know which Indian to talk to. And it's completely not reflective of our governance systems traditionally, right? So literally the work we do at Native Governance Center is helping to revitalize and return to the cultural and traditional forms of governance that Native nations have. And not saying to go back to that time, but to bring forward modern expression and modern interpretations of how we used to be, right? And again, our systems of governance were one that worked in nature holistically. Quite frankly, women had more rights. In Lakota society, women were the property owners. They owned the teepee. And so if the man stepped out or got out of line, she threw his ass out, excuse my language. And so we had these systems of jurisprudence that folks don't realize, these complex natures of how we governed each other. And what you have in America through the US Constitution is really a bastardized form of democracy. There's a great meme that has a guy looking over another guy's shoulder, and the guy looking over the shoulder says US Constitution, and the other guy writing It's the Great Law of Peace from the Haudenosaunee people, or most folks know them as the Iroquois, right? So even the fundamentals of democracy in this country were stolen from Indigenous peoples. And so what we have to work on, though, is getting back to that true nature of democracy, the true understanding of the reason why we come together, the reason states and tribes and this government is sovereign is because we as people collectively give our power to a few people to make decisions on behalf of us all to benefit us all. That's really gone awry the last, few years. And so as we as Indigenous people are returning our governance systems back, I think, and we're bringing those lessons forward, I truly feel that our example will help not only heal tribal nations, but then eventually heal the larger nations as a whole. And so, the work we do is directly related, and Indigenous governance principles are universal. There are things that we all hold dear, but they're not expressed currently in our governance systems. And so the more we as the people take back the power, make sure that we're expressing our will through our laws, through our systems of governance, the better we're all going to be. That doesn't, and I don't think that necessarily necessitates us excluding white people, but it damn sure has to make them uncomfortable.
Well, thank you. I don't know if there was any, Adrian wanted to offer any last reflections about this question. If not, then I am just, let's give a big round of applause or emoji or whatnot, thanking our wonderful panelists tonight. I mean, it's just, this topic is this whole year has been so timely, right? We are, again, as I started this evening, the precipice, there's this beautiful quote about America, we are America's midwives helping her give birth. I think we're going through some really telling times right now. So I'm grateful everyone could join us tonight. Chai's going to drop a little survey talking about how you thought about tonight's event. We'd love to have your feedback, suggestions for issue series for next year. If you want to partner with us, we're open to partnering. But on behalf of the BCLI and Nexus, I am super, super grateful. Yeah, Selena, that quote is not from me. It is from, I heard it from somebody who read it from a sign-in book at the Highlander Folk Center. And folks know Highlander is an amazing place where they train organizers. So do not attribute that to me. In addition to that, we had the wonderful quote about freedom is not a secret, it's a practice. I think this is all, I want to thank everybody we're all collectively engaging in this practice of co-governance. But big thank you to our speakers tonight, to Adrian Perryman, to Wayne Ducheneau, and Ana Vergara, who came out and are offering these great reflections. We are so grateful for your time. We will give you the gift of time, 5 minutes tonight. Thanks for everyone for hanging out tonight. I know some folks had to leave early, but yeah, let us know how it went. But otherwise, we wish you all well. We hope everyone is safe. Stay safe and healthy, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, because it's Thursday, right? And so finally the end of the week. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to say also too, what a good article in the Minnesota Women's Press, Miss Terry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good article. I opened it up and I said, oh,